My girlfriend is a model, using her body to earn quick money to support my studies. After 7 years, I graduated with a PhD and started working in research and development. The chairman took notice of me and offered me a position as a son-in-law. Without hesitation, I refused this overwhelming wealth and instead used my graduation savings to buy a diamond ring. Unexpectedly, on the day of the proposal, when I went to pick up my girlfriend, she fell from the sky and died naked in front of me. Later, the wealthy young lady took advantage of my drunken sorrow and climbed into my bed. Eventually, of course, I had to take responsibility and marry her. After all, how could I not marry her and avenge my girlfriend? Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. After achieving a milestone victory in my project, the chairman called me into his office. I have only one precious daughter. Marrying into our family means sharing in the riches and glory. I was taken aback. The Foster Group, a Fortune 500 company, this was no ordinary wealth. But I already had a girlfriend, so I had to politely decline. You brat. Zelda can see something in you. You should be grateful and not be ungrateful. The chairman threatened me with my job, giving me 3 days to consider, and then kicked me out. I stumbled home, my mind flashing through many memories. My girlfriend had originally been just a model, but to pay for my mother's surgery, she became a nude model. I didn't want to be burdened by money, so I pursued both my master's and doctoral degrees, choosing a research project that could earn money. Little did I know, before success, I would have to invest so much. Self-funded research is a long road. My seniors gradually dropped out or withdrew from school, but I finally made it through. I did it with my girlfriend's money. I had no idea how she managed to get $500,000, and I didn't dare to ask. That night, I held her tightly, feeling pained, and besides cursing fate for its unfairness, I vowed to earn a lot of money. On the day I joined the Foster Group, I spun around with my girlfriend, excitedly telling her, "Baby, I finally have the confidence to marry you. An annual salary of $1 million, not including project commissions." She was happy for me, but there was an unshakable sadness in her eyes. Although she didn't agree to marry me, she quietly resigned from her modeling job and switched careers to become a mall sales assistant. I couldn't let her down, nor did I want to. Before entering, I called the chairman. "I've made my decision. Please settle my salary for the past 6 months." Once inside, the aroma of dishes filled the air as I kept asking my girlfriend about her favorite styles. The next day, I went back to the company to clear out my things and prepare to leave. Zelda Foster, with red eyes, stopped me. "Why are you leaving? What's wrong with me?" To be honest, she was great. Serious, meticulous, and never made mistakes in recording data. So, everyone in the research lab had no idea that this seemingly insignificant recorder was the sole heir of the Foster Group. My colleagues, unaware of the truth, comforted her. "It's not like he's avoiding you." HR directly issued the notice. They were also indignant for me. Is the Foster Group out of their minds? Firing a core researcher. I was afraid of dragging them down, so I quickly said it was my own decision to leave. I handed Zelda a tissue and left amidst their ungrateful words. Unexpectedly, just as I reached the lobby, Zelda chased after me. "Do you know Sabrina Kelly is a prostitute? The kind you can pay for. Russian roulette, 100,000 each time." She looked confident as she reached out her hand to me. "If you regret it now, it's not too late." Suddenly, I remembered that the day after my girlfriend brought back money, she had gone to the hospital for a checkup. Before the results came out, she insisted I shouldn't touch her. All of this was my fault. With mixed feelings, I coldly stared at Zelda's hand. "I love her, including everything about her. I beg Miss Foster, please let us go." With that, I turned around and walked faster, not wanting to hear her insult my girlfriend anymore. But right until the moment I stepped out the door, I could still hear her crying. "Louis Rogers, you will regret this. You will definitely regret this." It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The salary from HR hadn't arrived yet, and I couldn't wait any longer. I had previously asked my girlfriend to try on the ring, but she kept making excuses. So, I had to take advantage of her being asleep, measure her ring finger, and go buy it alone. My girlfriend wasn't a vain person, but every time she saw a proposal scene in a drama, she would always tear up. Perhaps every girl looks forward to the moment she puts on the ring and makes a vow. I spent all the money I had on a 1-carat hexagonal diamond ring, carefully hiding it in my pocket. To be safe, when I went to bed that night, I even slipped it onto my girlfriend's ring finger. Fit perfectly. I secretly fiddled with it for a while until she turned over before I took it off. Tomorrow, I thought I had to have a sense of ceremony. In the morning, I gave her a good morning kiss, pretending to go to work, and booked a restaurant. The flowers and dishes were all her favorites. But I was a step too late. When I arrived at the mall, they said she had taken a leave of absence. I received a text message from an unknown number with an address. My heart raced with an inexplicable fear as I rushed over, my legs trembling. I originally thought it was just some unpleasant image. I was somewhat prepared for it. But when I reached the ground floor, bang, my girlfriend fell directly down, spitting blood. In that moment, it felt like something monstrous had seized my throat, and my heart was violently convulsing. No, I took off my jacket and covered my girlfriend's body, saying, "Baby, we need to go to the hospital." Trembling, I pulled out my phone but couldn't hold it steady. No need. When I felt her grip my wrist, realizing she had something to say, I immediately leaned down. "The engagement ring. I really like it, right?" Her voice was weak and shaky. She didn't even finish her sentence before she stopped breathing. When the ambulance arrived, the medical staff just took a glance and advised me to grieve. How can I grieve when fate is so unfair, and we're as fragile as ants? Holding my girlfriend's lifeless body, I went to the police station to report the incident. Suddenly, her gambling mother barged in, refusing an autopsy and forcing the cremation of my girlfriend. I knelt on the ground, begging her to let me seek justice for my girlfriend. She looked at me coldly and scolded. "It's all your fault, you beast, that my daughter is gone." Yes, it was all my fault. It was my incompetence. I watched her die right in front of me, and then I watched her be cremated and carelessly scattered in the river. Even with all my efforts, I only managed to grab a small handful of ashes. Yet they didn't even want to leave that for me. They wanted to take it away. I was so furious that I swallowed it down. From that moment on, we became one. After my girlfriend left, her mother came under the pretense of collecting her belongings and cleared out everything in our home. After being together for so long, she had never cared for her daughter, only demanding money for gambling. Now she was bustling around, which definitely seemed suspicious. I slumped on the sofa, numbly watching. She even took the potted plants my girlfriend had cared for, cleaning up every trace of her existence. Then, as she left, she glared at me fiercely and spat on the ground. "You bring bad luck. Get lost. Don't come after me. I'll burn it all." With her gone, what use were the belongings? I stood up and took a few steps. "Name your price. I'll buy it all." As expected, the person who used to chase after $1,000 suddenly acted tough. She slammed the door and left. Finally, I couldn't hold on any longer. My knees buckled, and my whole body fell to the ground. I hit the floor in frustration. Then I got back up, opened my computer, and started sending out resumes. When I walked out of the foster group, I felt optimistic. I thought with my abilities it wouldn't be a problem to find a job anywhere. But reality slapped me hard. Dozens of emails disappeared without a trace. Most were read but went unanswered. 3 days later, a small company finally offered me an opportunity. I set off with confidence, and just as I got in the car, I received a call from them. "Sorry, brother. It was a rare chance and I wanted to fight for it." Before I could say anything, they hung up. I was a bit breathless, got out of the car stiffly, and looked up at the sky. Today, the sun was shining brightly, yet not a single ray of light fell on me. Fortunately, when I published my paper earlier, I met a professor from abroad. I emailed him, hoping to develop my career overseas. Then, I had to wait a long time for a response. When people are idle, they tend to escape and numb their pain. I drank myself into a stupor, lying in bed, rubbing the engagement ring in my palm. She said she really liked it. Was that true? I hadn't even had the chance to give it to her. Feeling regretful, I faintly heard the sound of the door opening. I quickly hid the ring and collapsed onto the ground. A sweet, overwhelming scent of perfume filled my nose. The heiress had arrived. She put on a shy demeanor, staring at my face with infatuation. She touched my brows. Before we even reached the bed, she was already impatient, going all out. In the end, this was a woman's loss. As a big man, I could afford to lose my chastity. Tumbling onto the bed, as soon as I took off my clothes, I realized it still wasn't going to work. My mind was filled with images of my girlfriend falling down. Over and over again. I couldn't perform at all. I muttered that my head hurt, stopped moving, and pretended to be asleep. She teased for a while before losing interest, stripping off her clothes, and squeezing into my arms, breathing softly in my ear. We have plenty of time. Plenty of time. Every time we went shopping, my girlfriend would see something she liked but only look without buying. I took out my phone. I still had some money. She hurriedly said, "Don't buy. Don't buy, we have plenty of time." Silly girl, so focused on being good to me, yet she got nothing for herself. Just thinking about it made my heart ache, and I held back tears for a long time. Even my breathing became chaotic. A sleepless night passed. I kept my eyes closed until dawn. The heiress sobbed, "You hurt me last night." My heart skipped a beat. My gaze slowly swept over her, half smiling. "If I hurt you, how should I make it up to you? Do you want money? How much?" How strange. As soon as she heard "make it up," she blushed. But when she heard money, she became furious. "Louis Rogers, what do you take me for? A whore?" I found it amusing. "So if I don't pay, it's free? You." She raised her hand, but the slap was delayed. I wrapped her in the blanket, looking at her in confusion. I was pretending. When I upset my girlfriend, all I had to do was show this expression, and she couldn't help but poke my face. The heiress was no exception. I even heard her swallow hard. "I want you to be responsible for me. Is my face that charming?" I laughed self-deprecatingly. "Just lost my girlfriend, and now I'm looking for another one. How unlucky." And I glanced at the pristine bedsheets. "Are you concerned about this?" A hint of embarrassment flashed in her eyes, and her expression changed drastically. "You don't dislike her, but you dislike me?" This misunderstanding was getting serious. I shook my head, internally adding, "I love her. I dislike you." 3 days later, I received an invitation from the professor. Though the research is tough and the journey long, at least I have escaped the influence of the foster family. If I had known it would go so smoothly, I wouldn't have had to humiliate myself that night. I bitterly smiled as I packed my bags, but an unexpected guest arrived at my home. "Are you leaving?" He looked at me with a probing gaze and slowly said, "I really envy you. What a lunatic." I felt irritated and thought, "Spit it out already." He smiled and advised me to marry Zelda Foster. Rich people play with people, they can play with their lives. Just enjoy it. Why struggle needlessly? That made sense. The anger I had been suppressing for days seemed to find an outlet. I swung my fist, hitting that man in the face again and again. "If you don't get lost, I'll kill you." He didn't fight back or leave, just laughed madly and pointed to himself, asking, "My name is Zach Carlson. Do you know why I came?" Then, without waiting for my answer, he pulled out a stack of photos from his bag and tossed them onto the coffee table. "Nude model, I quite like her. The more I draw, the more I like her. I liked her so much that I paid 10 times the market price to have her as my model." I glanced at the photos and my blood ran cold. He smacked his lips. "Men, when they like someone, they want to sleep with them. Beast." I couldn't hold back and kicked at him, grabbing his collar. "Shut up." He still didn't fight back, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. and looked at me provocatively, gesturing with his left hand. Feels good. Crack. The sound of a bone breaking made me grit my teeth. Do you like being abused? He let out a muffled grunt, his expression becoming serious. Miss Foster has had her eye on you for a long time. She set me up to trick Sabrina into the studio. There were many people, and the door was locked. She also tricked me, and by the time I regretted it, it was too late. You know about Russian roulette, right? I clenched my fists. She didn't want to but was drugged. I spent $500,000 to book the place. She kept calling your name. I had no interest. These photos were taken to deal with Miss Foster, and part of them is in her hands. He smiled. I deceived everyone, including Sabrina. I had no choice. I was afraid she'd expose me and get me killed. The Foster family could crush me easier than stepping on an ant. Now, Miss Foster has given me an ultimatum to make sure I tell you about Sabrina's situation so you'll willingly marry her. Also, she was initially adamant about calling the police, but they threatened her with you, and she compromised. I said it, rich people can easily play with lives. He said a lot and I listened numbly. Once he finished, I made my decision. Zelda Foster, I will marry you. Those who harmed my girlfriend must pay. The wedding was a sensation throughout the city, attended by the elite. They praised me for my good fortune on the surface, but behind my back, they called me the princess's plaything. I was still too naive, hoping to gain access to the core of the business through a compromise in marriage. Utterly foolish. The chairman gave me a meaningless position in the company, forbidding me from working. Zelda clung to me, wanting more and more. The sleeping pills she took increased, and I genuinely feared that one day she would develop a tolerance. There was no choice. In front of her, I had a functional disorder, brutally leaving marks on her body. I spent sleepless nights. This wasn't a long-term solution. Before the wedding, Zelda said she wanted a wedding ring meant for a girlfriend. That brand allows a person to buy only one in a lifetime. I want it. At that moment, I forcibly suppressed the sweet rush rising in my throat. Isn't it disgusting? What do you think of yourself? She thought I was considering her feelings, tears welling in her eyes as she threw herself into my arms. Also, I'm a rich young lady. How can I use something that a cheap woman has used? She couldn't see the coldness in my eyes, cruelly insulting my girlfriend. Then she brought up wanting a child quickly. Without shame, she pushed me down onto the bed. I couldn't understand why she was in such a hurry. Isn't it supposed to be about pleasure? Until one day, she spoke in her sleep. Bitch, how dare you get pregnant with his child? Die. You die. I suddenly realized, shocked to the point of being breathless. My girlfriend, is she pregnant with my child? My heart felt like it was being tightly gripped, squeezing tighter and tighter. I was frantic, like a headless fly, running around aimlessly. To take revenge, I must first bring down the Foster family. What should I do? Just then, the previous project hit a bottleneck. I suggested going back to study it a bit. Zelda hesitated, not saying anything, and neither did her father. In the past, I thought they were afraid I'd become a threat and take over. Until later, I hired someone to investigate and found out the chairman had a secret lover. He also had a 5-year-old son. Suddenly, I understood. Parents love their children and plan deeply for them. He was indeed afraid of me becoming a threat, but he had no intention of handing the Foster family over to his daughter. I anonymously sent this information to Zelda, and deliberately complained in front of her from time to time. I don't know what Dad is thinking. He treats me like a thief. I'm just going to do some research. It doesn't involve promotions. Besides, if you take over in the future, I can help with project-related matters. So you won't be deceived. The word deceive was heavily emphasized, and Zelda momentarily looked dazed. I wanted to force her to make a choice. Pretending to be angry, I slammed the door and left. I knew she was toxic but not stupid. She would definitely choose what's beneficial to her. I heard that her mother tried many remedies to have a son and worshipped various deities. Unfortunately, before the son was born, she got into a car accident. So, she knew how much this younger brother meant to her father. She also began to suspect that her dad's intentions for not letting her go to the company were ulterior. 3 days later, I didn't know what method she used, but she managed to get me back to the research lab. Of course, she followed me, returning to her role as a recorder. The wedding was too extravagant, exposing her identity as a wealthy heiress. My colleagues no longer dared to joke around and were very reserved. After pondering for a month, I finally discovered the reason for the project's stagnation. So, avoiding the surveillance, I began conducting experiments. Initially, I chose to research this direction mainly because of its profitability. The huge profits. I pretended to be obsessed with gambling, losing money to a senior brother, and registered a biopharmaceutical company abroad. If you ask me if I'm afraid he'll run off with the money, I'm not. A smart person wouldn't pick up sesame seeds while letting go of watermelons. I lost openly without shame in lacking funds. I never sent any gifts to Zelda Foster during any holiday. She got angry, transferred money to me, and forced me to choose. Do you love me or not? At that moment, how should a scumbag act? I chuckled self-deprecatingly, reminiscing. My ex-girlfriend never disliked me for being poor. She always bought me this and that and never asked for any gifts. I actually want to ask you, do you love me or not? A few days ago, I specially practiced in front of the mirror for a long time on how to look cool when getting angry. When a person is angry, their face easily distorts. A man who makes a living off his looks must constantly discover his best expressions. I was confident. I was a standard wolf dog now. Zelda Foster anxiously tugged at my arm, collapsing against me and sobbing. Darling, the first time I saw you was on your PhD graduation day. You spoke as an outstanding graduate, and so did my friend. He invited you to dinner, but you said your girlfriend was unwell and you wanted to go back to make her some sweet soup. He told me at the time, this guy is so silly. I felt sorry for him and gave him a chance to join us, but he actually declined. I found it so harsh that I didn't hesitate to cut him off. Since then, I've always been distracted following you, watching you treat her well. One day it rained heavily. You carried her all the way, and I drove behind, feeling crazily jealous. My mom passed away early, and my dad had no time for me. I have money, but I've never received love. I know you resent me, but I love you. I really love you. You treat her well to repay her, right? If I had met you earlier, showing up during your toughest times, wouldn't you have loved me? It must be true. She doesn't deserve you. She doesn't understand your ideals and ambitions. I understand. I understand. You want to start a company and be independent, right? I'll fund it. We can be good together. Okay? Let's have a child, all right? She babbled incoherently, holding my face dreamily, swaying unsteadily. I was forced to support her back, my fingertips trembling from the effort. After much struggle, I finally suppressed the swirling hatred inside, forcing out a gentle smile. Okay, let's have a child. I'll work hard. Money was Zelda Foster's confidence. She transferred $10 million as startup capital, hinting that I should resign at the right moment. I split the money, transferring $5 million to my senior brother for continued research and patent application. Then, I used the remaining $5 million to boldly start a company to attract attention. Of course, I also had to deal with Zelda Foster on this side. I used the excuse of wanting to set an example for our child and realize my dreams to work overtime. Yet, I returned home at 9 o'clock every night to prepare bird's nest soup for her and slip in sleeping pills. After 6 months of this life, she finally got pregnant. Meanwhile, I lobbied the chairman to invest more in that long-researched project. If the research succeeded, it would surely monopolize the entire market. Such enormous profits were enticing. But before that, he had already invested 3 rounds and lost $80 million. In the office, he asked me with a dark face, "Can it really be developed? How long will it take?" I was full of confidence. It could be done, but the timing was uncertain. Before each request for funds, I would always tweak the research data a little, showing him some hope. But ultimately, it was just a mirage. He forced me to use the money earned from the new company to buy this unfinished research project. He even mocked me. If you're living off me, you should know your place and not dream of fighting for things that don't belong to you. Do you think I wouldn't know if you started a company? My daughter raises a dog. She likes it, so I allow it to eat better, that's all. It wasn't just about eating better. The old fox wanted me to cough it up now. Otherwise, he'd blacklist me in the industry and bankrupt me. That was still better than making money for him. I transferred assets and filed for bankruptcy. Then I turned around and went to give Zelda Foster eye drops. Old man, why are you so ruthless? You are his only daughter, and I am your husband. We rise and fall together. How could he force us to pay the money back? In the end, isn't the Foster family meant for you to inherit? I was furious yet dejected. I could see the resentment in her eyes fade away in an instant. Leaning against me, she comforted me, saying it was all right. Little did I know it wasn't all right after all. A month later, she hired a killer to kill her own brother. To this, I was amazed once again, realizing that having money truly allows one to do as they please. People are like ants, nothing more. When the chairman's hair turned white overnight and he found out about Zelda Foster, he was so furious he nearly had a stroke. He slapped his precious daughter across the face. Zelda Foster didn't cry but laughed, stumbling as she pointed at her father. Mom helped you build everything from scratch, and in the end, she got nothing. She even died on the way to give you a son. Before she passed, you promised her that you wouldn't remarry and that you would give everything to me. You don't keep your promises. The chairman was enraged. Have I ever wronged you? Without a son, you want me to hand over my life's work to someone outside the family. He cast a dissatisfied glance at me, scolding his daughter for being foolish. Zelda Foster touched her belly and smiled, saying, Dad, I'm pregnant. If this child takes the Foster name, it's not an outsider. Uncle Drake and Uncle Kelly, didn't they do the same? The chairman slammed the table in anger but was helpless. He had already lost one son, and this was his only daughter left. He had no place to vent his fury and could only take it out on me, the outsider. He had someone beat me up badly. I ended up with 3 broken ribs and was thrown out of the company. Louis Rogers and dogs are not allowed inside. Zelda Foster felt heartbroken but didn't dare to defy her father at that moment. I lay in the hospital for a week when my senior called, saying the research and development had entered its final phase. They had hit a bottleneck. I booked the fastest flight, hoping to get there. But because of my broken ribs, I couldn't board the plane. Zelda Foster frantically called me, asking why I wasn't in the hospital and where I had gone. I pretended to be angry, saying I was going abroad to relax. I spent some money to get a doctor to write me a note. Finally, I got on the plane. 3 months later, it was done. My senior invested domestically, built a factory, and quickly captured the market. When I went with him to acquire the Foster Group, the chairman glared at me and angrily shouted, You, Louis Rogers, treacherous traitor. How dare you sell our company's secrets? Get ready to go to jail. Yes, signing a confidentiality agreement means jail time. The chairman looked at me with a smirk, instructing someone to look for the agreement, threatened to call the police, and vowed to ruin me. When the legal advisor arrived, he was sweating profusely, his head lowered in fear. And no, it's gone. Yes, when I started my new company, Zelda Foster had secretly torn up the agreement. How could that be? The chairman slammed the table, his movements somewhat comical. My senior chuckled softly. Chairman, let's not discuss nonsense. Aren't you trying to sell the company? Let's talk business. Fine. The chairman sat back down, pointing at me. What position does he hold in your company? Fire him and we can talk. After a brief silence, my senior slowly replied, I'm afraid that won't work. He holds more shares than I do. With that, the chairman's nose was bent out of shape with anger. Then we won't negotiate. We won't sell to you. As soon as he finished speaking, Sue Foster burst in. Having not seen her for half a year, she had filled out considerably, her belly resembling a small hill. As soon as she saw me, her expression was complex. Shock, joy, and sorrow intertwined. "Hubby, you're back. Look, our child is growing up." Child? I suddenly remembered the baby in my girlfriend's belly. Our child. At that time, it might not have even been the size of a soybean. In fact, I hadn't even let Dad know of its existence. It had quietly disappeared. My eyes felt a bit wet, and I cleared my throat. "Zelda, the child has grown, and I have money now. You guys at the foster group must have lost quite a bit on those ineffective investments before. Now, the originally profitable projects are being hit with losses. Why don't you persuade your dad to sell the company, get some cash, and pay back the bank? After all, what's mine will eventually belong to the child." Having said that, I patiently gave her time to consider. The chairman, however, was unyielding, scolding me. "You ungrateful wretch. You're just a toy bought by my daughter. And you want to be someone important. Get this man out of here." He probably was so furious he lost his mind. Did he still think of me as that little employee he could step on and throw out like garbage? I looked at him with pity and smiled. "For Zelda's sake, I don't want to make things too awkward. If you don't want to sell the company, that's fine. Besides me, no one else would dare buy it. Just let it rot in your hands. Oh, and I have evidence of the foster group's tax evasion. Want to take a gamble? Who's going to jail?" From Zelda Foster, I learned that money is everything. I used a large sum to bribe the foster group's accountant. $9 billion. If the taxes couldn't be covered, it'd be enough to keep the old man locked up for life. When Zelda Foster heard this, she panicked. Crying, she rushed over, saying that was her real dad. I laughed heartily. "Your dear dad. His little lover is pregnant again." Upon hearing this, the chairman's face turned pale, and he pointed at me, speechless for a long time. Zelda Foster looked at her dad in disbelief, slowly sliding down to the floor, crying out in despair. The ground was cold, and no one went to help her. In the end, the chairman stood up unsteadily, helping Zelda Foster and asking her to take care of the child in her belly. With a resigned sigh, he said, "Let's talk about the contract." The Foster family was done for, and the old man just wanted to squeeze out some money before his son was born. How could I possibly give him what he wanted? Back then, I wanted to marry my girlfriend, seek justice for her, and preserve her ashes and belongings, but no one ever let me have my way. Moreover, as a good citizen, I had to report this shameful tax evasion. After spending some money, I had the finance department prepare the documents. The next second, Zelda burst in and begged me, "For the sake of the child, can you let my dad go?" She cried like a delicate beauty. I lifted her chin, only to find her face utterly disgusting. "Did you let her go 5 years ago?" I had disguised myself well over the years. Zelda looked at me in confusion. After a while, her face turned pale. "She was just a prostitute. Why can't you forget her? I love you so much. I love you so much." "Is that so?" I recalled the things I had found out and told Zelda. "You were wild in college, dating male models left and right. How many did you sleep with in one night?" She shook her head, crying pitifully. "That was before I met you. I'm different from her." I laughed silently. Was spending money more noble than earning it? "So during the months I was abroad, you didn't go out and have fun?" The lonely rich woman was the easiest to seduce, so I found a man who looked about 70% like me. I had him approach Zelda. Within a week, he had her wrapped around his finger. And yet, she claimed to love me? Zelda finally stopped arguing, lowering her head in embarrassment. "No matter what, the child is yours. I beg you." As soon as the child was mentioned, I looked at her swollen belly and chuckled. "The child in your belly isn't mine. The night at my house, I didn't touch you, and after marriage, even less so. Aren't you the noble daughter of the Gao family? How was the taste of those men?" She had been crying suppressively, but suddenly lifted her head and screamed, accusing me of lying. "You're just saying that out of anger, aren't you? You blame me for not resisting temptation, don't you?" A mad woman had a lot of strength. I slapped her twice to make her quiet down. That day, her dad had people pin me down and beat me. Today, I also found 2 security guards to do the same. She writhed in pain on the ground, desperately protecting her belly, begging me to spare our child. I thought for a moment. My poor child had been dead for 5 years. All right. I had the security guards leave and asked the bruised Zelda, "How did you force her to her death that day?" "Not going to say?" I took out my phone and sent a message. A minute later, a call came in, and I put it on speaker. "Mr. Rogers, I've reported the Foster family's tax evasion to the relevant authorities." 5 minutes later, "Mr. Rogers, Chairman Foster's funds have all been frozen." "No!" Zelda cried out in despair, trying to lunge at me to hit me. I restrained her hands and asked again, "How did you force her to her death that day?" This time, Zelda finally spoke. "That stupid woman, I had someone take turns with her, and when she couldn't take it anymore, she jumped off a building." It seemed she finally let out some pent-up anger as she provocatively looked at me. "Are you satisfied with the truth now? Happy?" I didn't believe her. Not a word of it. My girlfriend wouldn't have been so worried about me that she would take her own life. Even if living was painful, she would still choose to live. Just like that day when she thought she was insulted, she still maintained her composure and made me a sumptuous dinner. She even brought back 500,000, encouraging me to finish my studies. My gaze swept over her prominently rounded belly as I lifted my foot. You know, at that time, she was pregnant with my child. You should compensate for a child. No! With a misstep, she lay sideways, hugging my leg. That's not your child. That's Zach Carlson's child. Doesn't matter. I couldn't be bothered to explain to her. It really didn't matter. As long as it comes out of her belly, I'll acknowledge it. A simple sentence, but unexpectedly, it broke Zelda down again. If you can acknowledge what's in her belly, why can't you acknowledge what's in mine? I'm the one who swore to you as your wife. I looked at her with amusement, like watching a clown performance. She frantically rummaged through her bag. The child is Zach's. I'll call him over to confront you. Unfortunately, the call didn't go through. The number was no longer in service. Zach, such a smart person. Because of Zelda's pressure, he figured I would marry her out of revenge and chose to tell me the truth, temporarily avoiding a catastrophe. But he should never have gone abroad to hold an art exhibition. All of the works were my girlfriend's paintings. He clearly promised to destroy them. He truly deserved to die. I had no choice but to burn the exhibition down. By the way, I burned him too. I told you, for the rich, it's easy to play with lives. There can be an additional line at the end, and they don't have to take responsibility. A mere $1,000 could attract a multitude of refugees, all scrambling for a chance to take the fall. This world has turned upside down, including me. I really intended to stomp on her belly, step by step. She was so scared that she curled up in the corner, crying out, "I was wrong, I was wrong. I know she's pregnant. If we calculate the days, it should be yours." I was so furious that I called her out. "Well, I know you'll never despise her, so I forced her. If she doesn't strip and jump down, I'll find someone to take her on. And my dad will blacklist you in the circle." Ha ha ha. She was still struggling, but as soon as she heard about the blacklist, she opened the window and climbed up. I was just joking. I really only meant to scare her. I didn't think I'd actually drive her to death. She seemed trapped in a terrible nightmare, hugging her arms and trembling all over. I was afraid you'd make a big deal out of it, so I called her mom to handle it. Poor people are just cheap. She asked for $1 million, and I only offered 500,000, but she hurriedly agreed, fearing I'd change my mind. Later, ha ha ha, blood. Honey, I'm bleeding. Honey, our child. Zelda Foster had a miscarriage. After his dad went in, I found his little lover. 500,000, just 500,000, and she aborted her own child. Poor chairman, he wouldn't even get to see his son born. My senior was worried about my mental state and advised me, "You should let it go. The joys and sorrows of the world do not connect. He has a wife and kids, warm in bed, and doesn't understand me at all. I told Zelda Foster this news, hoping it would make her happy. Unexpectedly, she went mad. All right, as her only legal guardian, I had no choice but to send her to a mental hospital. I heard that after staying there for a while, she would say to anyone she met, "I'm a nude model. Pay me and I'll pose." After saying that, she actually caught another patient, Zach Carlson, hurry and draw me. She quickly stripped off her clothes. Little did she know, that person had been abused by his stepmother in childhood and had a fear of women. He lost control and strangled her. I handled Zelda Foster's aftermath and took her ashes to show the chairman. I also casually told him that his little lover regretted it and the child wasn't born. Upon hearing this, the chairman excitedly slammed the window, vowing to kill me. "All right, I'm waiting. You'd better hurry." I slowly put the ashes back in the bag. Then I went out and scattered them into the stinking gutter. Later, the chairman suffered a heart attack and died in prison. I feel like I should also die. I caused my girlfriend's death. That's original sin. Originally, I wanted to leap down and join her. A master found me. "She's in heaven, you'll go to hell. Even if you chase after her, it will be in vain." My heart tightened, suddenly feeling a pain as if my bones were being pulled out. "Senior, I've earned enough money for you too. Don't send anyone to trick me." The master smiled. "I only see that you have fate." I didn't believe it. But that night, I dreamed of my girlfriend. She looked at me gently. "Louis, I didn't drink the Mengpa soup. I'm waiting for you on the bridge of helplessness. The judge said if you do 1,000 good deeds and live to an old age, we can meet again in our next life." Really? I suddenly woke up and called my senior. "That cancer miracle drug is on sale.